My toxic stepmother and her golden child son threw me out of my late father's multi-million-dollar defense technology firm, calling me a talentless, paranoid programmer who was living on their corporate charity. They scrubbed my name from the master patent registries, revoked my high-level security clearance, wiped 7 years of my source code, and tried to sell my autonomous defense algorithm to an international private syndicate for $800 million. But they made one fatal error in their rush to become elite billionaires. My name is Evelyn, and I didn't just write the neural network for that AI infrastructure. I built an encrypted subterranean kill switch deep inside the hardware firmware. At their global tech demonstration tonight, I didn't just prove their entire system was completely compromised. I activated the remote protocol on live international television, seized control of their entire server network, and watched the federal agents drag them out of the building in heavy chains. For nearly 8 grueling, exhausting years after my father's mysterious death, I lived like an invisible ghost inside the high-security basement of Vance Defense Technologies. My father, Arthur Vance, was a visionary software architect who spent his life developing next-generation autonomous safety grids and threat detection systems for civil infrastructure. He was a genius in engineering, but he was blind when it came to his second wife, Victoria. When my father died in a suspicious car accident, Victoria used her legal influence to take administrative control of the executive board, appointing her lazy, arrogant son, Julian, as the senior vice president of cyber operations. Julian was a guy who had dropped out of 2 computer science colleges, couldn't write a single line of functional Python code, but walked around the office wearing $1,000 suits, treating every brilliant engineer like disposable trash. My name is Evelyn. I inherited my father's sharp mathematical mind, his sharp instincts, and his absolute obsession with perfection. While Julian spent his weekends racing sports cars in Monaco, flying on private jets, and flexing an artificial billionaire lifestyle on social media, I was locked inside the subterranean Level 5 cybersecurity vault for 18 hours a day. I poured my life, my health, and my youth into building my father's dream project, an ultra-advanced autonomous defense and cybersecurity algorithm codenamed Aegis-X. Aegis-X was not just software, it was a digital fortress. It was an artificial intelligence core designed to detect, isolate, and neutralize high-level cyber threats, military hacks, and drone interceptions in real time. On the global market, a functional system like Aegis-X was priceless, worth hundreds of millions to international security firms. But to me, it was never about the money. Aegis-X was the physical embodiment of my father's legacy, a shield built to protect innocent lives. My reward for 8 years of solitary mathematical breakthroughs came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in late November. Victoria summoned me to the glass-walled executive penthouse suite on the top floor. When I stepped into the room, Victoria was sitting behind my father's old mahogany desk, sipping expensive wine. Sitting next to her was Julian, tossing a set of luxury car keys up and down with a smug smile. On the polished glass table sat a single document, a mandatory termination letter accompanied by a predatory, non-negotiable non-disclosure agreement. Victoria didn't even look up at me as she slid the paper across the desk. She told me in a freezing, uncaring tone that my services at Vance Defense Technologies were officially terminated. She claimed that because I was socially unstable and lacked executive vision, I had become a massive liability to the company's upcoming international acquisition. She announced that Julian was taking over as the sole lead architect and owner of the Aegis-X project effective immediately. Julian leaned forward, laughing right in my face. He told me that his name had already been registered with the International Patent Registry as the sole creator of Aegis-X. He bragged that a private, shadowy European defense syndicate called Vanguard Tech had agreed to buy the exclusive commercial distribution rights for $800 million. "You should be thanking us, Evelyn," Julian sneered, leaning back in his chair. "We paid you a nice little salary, while you played around with your computers in the basement. But real corporate power requires influence. We are taking this family into the global elite. And frankly, a quiet antisocial girl who sits in dark server rooms just doesn't fit our high society brand." When I refused to pick up the pen and refused to sign their fraudulent NDA, Victoria's polite mask completely slipped. She pressed a button under the desk, calling in 3 heavy corporate security guards, and ordered them to escort me off the premises immediately. I watched in absolute silence as those guards marched me down the private elevator, dragged me out through the rear loading dock, and threw my personal duffel bag, containing my father's old handwritten system schematics, straight into a dirty rain puddle in the alleyway. The head of security stood over me and warned me that if I ever stepped foot within 2 miles of Vance Defense property again, Victoria would have me thrown into a high-security prison for corporate espionage and terrorism. I stood there in the pouring rain, holding my father's soaked notebooks against my chest, watching the heavy steel gates lock shut. They thought I was destroyed. They assumed that a quiet software architect who had spent her entire life surrounded by microchips, server racks, and lines of code would fall apart, cry, and fade away into poverty. But Victoria and Julian were corporate parasites. They understood stock manipulation, media manipulation, and offshore tax havens, but they knew absolutely nothing about deep-level system architecture. They viewed software like physical gold bars. They foolishly believed that whoever held the master server drives in their hands was the absolute owner of the code inside them. What those greedy frauds failed to realize was that during my endless, lonely nights in that subterranean server vault over the past 3 years, I had anticipated their betrayal. I had watched Victoria quietly bleed millions of dollars from the company's research grants into unregistered shell accounts in Panama. I knew that the moment Aegis-X achieved 100% operational stability, they would try to wipe my name, erase my father's memory, and walk away with the fortune. So when I compiled the final core operating kernel for Aegis-X into the master server arrays 2 months prior, I didn't just program the neural networks and defense algorithms. I embedded a silent, undetectable subterranean firmware locked deep inside the hardware microprocessors, known in cybersecurity as a phantom kernel. The phantom kernel was a masterpiece of digital engineering. It was designed to keep the entire AI system, drone networks, and defense shields operating smoothly only if the primary server received a daily, multi-layer biometric handshake signal from my personal offline server. If the server array missed that encrypted signal for more than 72 consecutive hours, the phantom kernel would trigger a quiet, self-sustaining logic loop inside the microprocessors. Within 3 days of missing my private authorization, the $800 million AI system would begin distorting its own decision trees, turning the entire high-tech network into a scrambled, useless brick of dead silicon. And because Julian didn't possess the basic engineering intellect to read raw assembly code, he had no idea the phantom kernel even existed. He just walked into the server room, saw the blue lights glowing on the racks, and assumed he was holding the keys to nearly $1 billion. Exactly 72 hours after they threw me into the rain, the timer expired. That evening, Julian was attempting to run a live demonstration of Aegis-X for a group of international delegates from Vanguard Tech naturally. When he initialized the primary neural network, the system monitors didn't show a green operational status. Instead, every screen in the control room flashed dark orange, displaying a critical hardware failure error. Panic hit him hard. At 5:30 p.m., my private encrypted phone rang. It was an unlisted burner line. I answered calmly. On the other end was Julian. The arrogant, condescending tone he had used in the penthouse 3 days ago was completely gone. His voice was shaking, cracking with pure terror. He screamed at me, accusing me of hacking the internal servers, demanding to know why the AI core was refusing his administrative commands and throwing critical logic errors. He threatened to call federal law enforcement and have me hunted down for cyberterrorism if I didn't give him the master admin key immediately. I sat peacefully by the window of my small, quiet apartment, sipping warm tea, looking out over the rainy city streets, and spoke in a cold, deadpan voice. "Julian," I said softly, "if you are truly the brilliant software genius and sole creator listed on that $800 million patent, fixing a basic logic loop should take you 2 minutes. Why are you begging an uneducated basement programmer for help?" Before he could scream another word, I hung up the phone and disconnected the line. I didn't just sit in my apartment waiting, though. Passive waiting is for victims, and I wanted total, absolute devastation. Over the last 72 hours, while Julian was blindly celebrating his fake victory, I had been working nonstop with Agent Marcus Vance from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cybercrime Division, along with senior officials from the Department of Homeland Security and the International Intellectual Property Commission. I provided them with irrefutable, ironclad digital evidence. My original timestamp source code repositories dating back 8 years, cryptographic proof of my biological digital signatures embedded in the microchip firmware, and forensic banking logs showing Victoria's illegal money laundering operations to offshore accounts. Together, we planned the ultimate trap, aiming directly at the most prestigious event in the tech world, the Global Cybersecurity Expo at the Metropolitan Convention Center. The Metropolitan Convention Center was a massive display of elite corporate luxury. Over 3,000 high-profile guests filled the grand auditorium. Foreign dignitaries, billionaire tech investors, military contractors, government representatives, and live international news broadcasts streaming to millions of viewers worldwide. Victoria and Julian had spent millions to turn this night into their personal crowning moment. In the center of the main stage stood 4 massive high-tech autonomous defense drones, while a giant 60-foot 8K screen projected a glowing dynamic blue matrix representing the Aegis-X neural core. Julian stood near the center stage wearing a designer tuxedo, talking smugly into a wireless headset, bragging to reporters about how he spent years of grueling technical work in the lab, creating the future of global defense. Victoria stood beside the lead director of Vanguard Tech, holding an engraved gold pen over a heavy legal contract worth $800 million. "Tonight, ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced into the microphone, her voice echoing through the massive sound system, "Vance Defense Technologies launches a new era of security. We are officially transferring full ownership of Aegis-X to our global partners." The director of Vanguard Tech smiled, bringing the pen down toward the signature document. "I strongly suggest you do not sign that paper, Director." A cold, sharp voice echoed through the auditorium speakers. The audio output carried such absolute authority that the entire room fell into an instant dead silence. The camera crews froze. The crowd turned around in shock. The heavy reinforced double doors at the rear of the auditorium burst open. I walked into the venue, stepping smoothly down the center aisle. I was wearing a sharp, tailored obsidian black suit, holding a high-grade military diagnostic terminal. Walking directly behind me were 10 armed federal marshals and 6 senior agents from the FBI Cyber Division. Victoria's face instantly transformed from a proud fake smile into a pale, horror-stricken mask. She practically vaulted toward the podium microphone, screaming at the venue security team to shoot me or drag me out, claiming I was an insane, disgruntled former technician trying to ruin their historic launch. "Security won't move an inch, Victoria," I said, my voice dead steady as I walked straight up the stage stairs, standing right between Julian and the international investors. "Because I am executing a federal warrant issued 2 hours ago by the Federal District Court to inspect and freeze all illegally stolen assets currently on this stage." Julian broke into a cold, heavy sweat, shaking so violently his microphone picked up his rapid breathing. He stammered that the contract was legal property, and that I had no legal authority to interfere with their event. "If Aegis-X is truly your code, Julian, and if this system is fully operational under your leadership," I said, staring directly into his panicked eyes, "then you shouldn't mind if I run a quick 10-second system diagnostic scan right now." The lead director of Vanguard Tech backed away from the table, his face hardening as he looked back and forth between Julian's terrified expression and my ice-cold confidence. "Stop the signature," the director ordered his team. "Let her run the diagnostic." I didn't hesitate for a single microsecond. I raised my terminal, pointed the wireless link at the central server rack on stage, and tapped the screen to trigger the phantom kernel. A loud, piercing red emergency siren blared through the auditorium audio system. The massive 60-foot screen behind the stage suddenly glitched out, breaking into thousands of red lines of corrupted binary code, before resetting completely. Instead of showing Julian's polished marketing slides, the giant screens began scrolling at lightning speed through thousands of pages of my original, time-stamped code commits, my father's original mechanical blueprints, and live interactive financial diagrams displaying Victoria's secret Panama bank accounts in glaring neon green highlights. And right in the dead center of the 60-foot display, in massive glowing red letters, the core system alert displayed. System architecture corrupted. AI core locked by author. Unapproved hardware detected. All permissions revoked. Property of Evelyn Vance. A massive collective gasp echoed from the audience of 3,000 people. Dozens of camera crews rushed toward the stage, flashbulbs popping like a storm, capturing every single second of their destruction on live international TV. "What is the meaning of this?" the director of Vanguard Tech roared, slamming his hands onto the table. You tried to sell us $800 million worth of broken, stolen code? Julian completely lost control. His legs buckled beneath him and he collapsed onto the stage floor, sobbing hysterically, grabbing his mother's dress, blobbering incoherent excuses. Victoria tried to back away toward the rear stage curtain, attempting to disappear into the dark background. Victoria Vance. Julian Vance. The lead FBI agent called out, his voice booming across the hall. Federal agents stepped up, cutting off every escape route. The lead agent pulled out a thick stack of federal arrest warrants, stepping directly in front of Victoria. Victoria Vance, Julian Vance. The agent announced clearly for every live camera to record. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, theft of national defense IP, corporate espionage, and high-level financial fraud. The agents grabbed Victoria's arms, pulling them behind her back and snapping heavy steel handcuffs onto her wrists. Victoria completely abandoned her sophisticated image, screaming curses at me, kicking wildly as the agents dragged her across the stage. Julian was lifted off the ground, crying weeping tears, his expensive tuxedo ruined as he was paraded past the very military officials, media reporters, and tech leaders he had tried to scam. I walked slowly over to the main server console, picked up the master hardware key, and looked down at Victoria as the agents pushed her toward the exit doors. My father built this technology to protect human lives, I said, my voice carrying over the entire quieted room. You tried to sell his soul for greed, and you forgot the most fundamental rule of engineering. A system built on stolen code will always crash. The legal fallout was immediate, absolute, and total. With the federal warrants executed and my original code repositories validated by federal cyberforensic teams, the courts immediately stripped Victoria and Julian of all corporate shares and legal rights. The fraudulent filings were thrown out, and full, unencumbered ownership of Vance Defense Technologies, its laboratories, patents, and hardware facilities was officially awarded back to me as Arthur Vance's rightful heir and the true creator of Aegis-X. Within 2 weeks, I walked back through the front doors of the headquarters, not through the rear alleyway, but as the chief executive officer. I fired Victoria's corrupt board members, purged the fake executives, and promoted every honest, hard-working engineer who had been mistreated under Julian's fake management. I uploaded my biological decryption key from my private server, clearing the phantom kernel and restoring Aegis-X to full operational power. But instead of selling the exclusive rights to a shady private syndicate for $800 million, I restructured the company into a transparent, open-source safety network, partnering directly with public civil infrastructure and international rescue teams to ensure that my father's technology would save millions of lives around the globe. As for Victoria and Julian, their offshore accounts were completely frozen and seized by federal prosecutors to pay back millions in court fees and damages. Today, they are serving 16-year sentences in a federal penitentiary, doing hard manual labor, completely broken by the very greed that drove them to betray their own blood. The fake engineers were deleted, the truth was fully restored, and my father's legacy was finally right where it belonged, in the hands of the daughter who built it from the ground up. My stepfamily thought they could throw me out into the alley, delete my father's memory, and sell my mind to the highest bidder, but they learned the ultimate, unchangeable law of programming. A system built on fraud will always disintegrate when the true code executes. Today, Victoria and Julian are staring at steel bars inside a federal cell. Vance Defense Technologies is leading the world in ethical cybersecurity, and Aegis-X is protecting millions of people every single second. But the fight to protect technology from falling into corrupt hands never ends. Next week, a rogue military contractor attempts to deploy an illegal clone of our system to hijack an automated cargo fleet and frame my company for the attack. If you want to see how Evelyn uses her high-tech counter-hacking grid to trap the rogue contractor inside his own network and expose his shadow operations on national television, make sure to smash that subscribe button right now, leave a like, and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on Evelyn's ultimate payback. See you in the next story.